Councillor Stagg, your meeting is now live.
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to the Traffic and Transportation Portfolio Decision meeting, which is being held virtually. I am Councillor Lynn Stagg, the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation, and I'm chairing the meeting today. We're meeting virtually in response to the limitations placed on government by the COVID-19 pandemic. Until recently, the law stated that all members had to be present in the room to make formal decisions at meetings. However, the law was amended in response to the COVID-19 emergency, and councils are able to hold public meetings virtually. This will be in accordance with the local authorities' coronavirus flexibility of local authority meetings regulations 2020 number 392, the regulations. Members of the public are invited to view this meeting, and there's been the opportunity for written representations to be submitted. This is a new experience for many participants, and we will all need to exercise patience and understanding whilst we familiarise ourselves with the new arrangements. Those present are requested to keep their microphones on mute and to only turn them on when they are called to speak. Members are requested to keep their cameras turned on at all times. Officers are requested to turn their cameras on only when they are presenting their reports or answering questions. If anyone would like to speak, please write their name and RTS, request to speak, in the chat function. Please access the chat from the horizontal menu bar and right-click to bring it up, not the icon on the left-hand side. Each time you speak, please say who you are so it is clear who is speaking. If there are technical difficulties, we will endeavour to resolve these and, where necessary, have a brief adjournment, but the meeting can proceed where quorate. I would now like to invite those present to introduce themselves. Please reply by stating your name and saying present. Those not able to confirm they are present will be recorded as absent. Councillor Bosher, are you present? Please turn
present, Councillor Stagg.
Thank you, Councillor Bosher. Councillor Heaney, are you present?
Yep, present. So.
Councillor Peter Harris, are you present? It's obviously going to be late. Councillor Winnington, are you present?
I'm here. I'm sorry, Councillor Stagg, I'm here.
Oh, right. Thank you, Councillor Peter Harris. Sorry.
Sorry, it's my mistake. I couldn't get the technology to work.
Oh, dear. Blame it on the tools.
I am. I blame it on terrible stuff. Sorry about that.
That's okay, fine. And Councillor Winnington.
Present, then.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to, I've lost my screen now, which is a bit of a nuisance. I think we move on to apologies. Is that right, Jane? Am I doing this right?
Yes, that's fine. Councillor Stagg. I haven't received any apologies.
Right, thank you. And declarations of members' interest? Are there any declarations of members' interest from any of those present? Councillor Bosher.
No declarations, Lynn.
Thank you. Councillor Heaney?
No declarations of interest.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Harris? I did see the miming of that. You are actually on mute, but
no, nothing from me. I'm good.
Lovely, good, thanks. And Councillor Winnington?
Nothing from me.
Lovely, thank you all very much.
Sorry to intrude at this point, Lynn. This is Luke Stubbs. Just as we're doing declarations, I better say as well, I've no declarations.
Oh, right. Thank you, Luke. My apologies. Are there any other councillors who are in on this? No? Okay, thank you. Right, now then I've got a chairman's announcement about the Transforming Cities Fund investment for Portsmouth and South East Hampshire. And I'm really pleased to announce, well, most people know, I think by now, that we did secure £56 million of funding from the DFT, plus additional funding from stakeholders such as the bus companies and Network Rail, bringing the total up to £101 million. And that is going to go on creating a bus rapid transit network with 5 corridors. Portsmouth to Havant, Portsmouth to Waterlooville, Portsmouth to Fareham, Portsmouth to the Isle of Wight, and Fareham to Gosport. But we are in conjunction with South East Ham, so it's not just Portsmouth. And this will involve things like bus lanes to enable buses to travel more swiftly and without congestion, bus gates so that they get priority at lights, improved junctions, an improved east-west cycle route. And this should all result in shorter travel times, for example, as much as 11 minutes off a bus journey between Lee Park and Portsmouth, safer cycling, increased bus frequency, and smart ticketing. So you can use it on several different buses. So together with the increased rail use, which hopefully will come about with the latest work being done with Network Rail, it's estimated, and also with Transport for the South East, which is looking at linking the three major ways, radial between the South Coast and London, and also orbital going from east to west, so that improving the network, both rail and road, east-west. I said three, I meant two. So that hopefully will result in a 29% increase in public transport use, subject to COVID, obviously. But we're really pleased about that. A lot of hard work has gone into this by officers. So congratulations to all of them. And it's been a hard journey for all the officers. So well done to everybody. Thank you. Right. I've lost my screen again. Now we move on to the item number 4, which is school crossing patrols resources. Pam, I think you're going to be doing that, aren't you?
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Stagg. This report is for noting, and it is to provide an update on the availability of resources within the school crossing patrol budget. Essentially, the school crossing patrol budget enables us to have 50 school crossing patrollers, 45 of which are at fixed locations throughout the city. And we have a further 5 slots, if you like, for peripatetic SCPs, school crossing patrollers, who can act as relief school crossing patrollers if one of our fixed location school crossing patrollers becomes ill or unable to work due to ill health. There are currently 4 of those positions filled at the moment, with 1 further vacancy. The rest of the report goes on to discuss the process which has gone through if resources are required to be moved and a resources officer.
Thank you. Councillor Bosher, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Stagg, my chat function doesn't seem to be working. I've just got one question, if I can, and it's perhaps a request as much as anything. 3.4 talks in terms of the sites with the highest number of pedestrian crossings, although closest to the areas of high casualties, will be prioritised. Does that mean that the council holds a priorities list of sites?
You've gone on to mute, Simon.
It's playing up with me. There's a lag here somewhere. Did you hear that? It's to do with the priorities list highlighted in 3.4. It infers that there is a list of priorities around the city. I just wondered whether that list could be made available to the opposition spokesman.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, we can certainly do that after the meeting.
Yeah, good point. Yes. Anything else, Simon?
No, that was it. I know it's for noting, but obviously nobody wants to see their school being the bottom of that particular list and losing its crossing wardens if they can possibly help it.
Yeah. Councillor Heaney.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Stagg. I just have one question about the vacancy. I know Pam mentioned there's a vacancy. How long has that vacancy been there, and are we in a position to recruit that final post?
I don't know the answer to the longevity of the post being vacant, but I can certainly find that out for you. And yes, we are still active.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Anything else? Simon.
No, I've taken my hand down, Lynn.
All right, okay. It's still appearing on the screen, so.
My apologies. There appears to be a distinct lag between me clicking something and it actually happening.
Don't worry, that's fine. Okay, lovely. Thank you. Yes, I've noted that, and Pam, you will do the two things asked, and that's the list of the priority school places, and also the recruitment of that empty vacant space. Thank you. Right, I think we're now on to item 5, which is Solent Connectivity Network Rail Solent Continuous Modular Strategy Plan, which is about 5 million pages long, but very, very interesting. And who's going to present that? Is that you, Pam, or is it somebody else?
No, that's going to be Hayley.
Oh, right. Oh, Hayley, right. Thank you. Hayley, will you go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So the purpose of this report is to inform members of the recommendations for the future development of train services in the Solent area, so Portsmouth to Southampton, Eastleigh, contained in the Solent Connectivity, the Solent Continuous Modular Strategic Planning Study. Network Rail have undertaken a continuous modular strategic planning study covering the following routes in the Solent area, including Portsmouth and Havant to Southampton, Fareham to Eastleigh and Winchester, Southampton to Totton, Southampton to Romsey and Eastleigh to Romsey. The main aims of the CMSP process are to work closely with local authorities and local enterprise partnerships to identify current and future transport needs in specific areas, to identify how rail can better serve these transport needs, and to focus on the transport needs of rail customers and to improve Network Rail's engagement with train operators. Section 4 of the report outlines the Solent CMSP recommendations, including those mentioned in the following recommendations of the report. It is recommended that the Cabinet Member for Traffic and Transportation notes the contents of this report, endorses the CMSP recommended train service specification, Portsmouth to Southampton, additional 2 trains per hour giving 4 trains per hour, and Portsmouth to Eastleigh, additional train per hour giving 2 trains per hour, supports in principle the following CMSP recommended infrastructure measures that will be required in Portsmouth to facilitate the new services, reinstatement of track in platform 2 at Portsmouth Harbour Station, bringing the platform back into use, and or provision of an additional platform at Portsmouth and Southsea Station adjacent to the low-level platforms 3 and 4. Portsmouth City Council officers have contributed to the development of the CMSP study. As a key member of the Solent Transport Partnership, it has part ownership of the study and its recommendations for rail service improvements. If delivered, the rail service improvements would deliver significant transport and economic benefits to the city, as described in section 4.2 of the report. The CMSP recommendations for rail service improvements will form part of the emerging Portsmouth City Council Public Transport Strategy, which is a supplementary document of the draft LTP4. Endorsement of the CMSP recommendations and support for the associated infrastructure measures by Portsmouth City Council is sought to demonstrate local support for the proposals and is necessary to progress towards delivery of these proposals. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Hayley. Councillor Bowsher, do you have a question on this? No? Okay. Councillor Heaney?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions actually. The report makes it clear that the increased services from Portsmouth Southampton are unlikely to start until the COVID crisis is if not over, at least in a different phase than it is now. So I'm assuming that the possibilities of those services won't start until sometime maybe in the middle of next year. Would that be a correct assumption to make? And I have another question to ask after that, which is on the just
Amy? Hayley seems to be having problems.
Sorry. Yeah, when COVID pandemic has passed, more information is available, the options will be reassessed at that time.
So we could be talking way into next year before we even think about these extended services taking place. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. The second question related to the capital works improvements, the suggestions of new works at Portsmouth Southsea Station and also Portsmouth Harbour as an either or an addition. Now, I will freely admit that I haven't read every single page of the attached 114-page report. I did skim read it, so I might have missed it, but I couldn't be quite clear from reading key sections when this might be potentially happening. It looks like it's a long-term aspiration rather than a specific proposal. Can you clarify when that might possibly happen?
Yeah, James, do you want to answer that one?
Right. Yes. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, can hear you fine, James.
Can hear you.
Okay, right. I'm James Neville, Public Transport Officer. Yeah, Solent Transport are working with Network Rail and the Department of Transport to get these infrastructure improvements included in the rail network enhancement programme of proposed enhancement schemes around the country. Unfortunately, because the COVID crisis has changed the demand for rail and affected the finances, it's unclear at the moment when the DFT will be in a position to start implementing the RNEP schemes. At the moment, it's all rather uncertain. Okay, I'm afraid I can't offer any more than that.
Thank you, James. So basically, there's a lot of infrastructure work got to happen first before any of this can go ahead.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's, yes, that's right. Yes.
Thank you, James.
So can I just follow up on that? Because then obviously my first question was about services, second was about infrastructure. Yes. So are the extra services that might be provided from Southampton Portsmouth dependent on the new infrastructure, or can they happen without the new infrastructure?
I think to have them all together, you would probably quite likely to need the new infrastructure, but it's possible that some of them might be able to happen without it, but not all of them.
That's sort of helpful. But just if we just are really sort of selfish and just take our own thing about increasing the train sports of Southampton from 2.5 to 4, could that be done without extra physical capacity at Portsmouth or Southsea and Portsmouth Harbour?
I don't know for sure, but I would have to inquire with Network Rail, right? Because they didn't make it quite clear. Yes.
No, that's what I thought when I read the report. I couldn't be clear that they were. Yeah, that's why I asked the question. So I think we're all a bit in the dark about it, which is understandable. But right,
thing is, I mean, certainly, the more terminal capacity you have, okay, the more robust the timetable, and therefore the less likely it is that one train being late will delay lots of others. So I think that so I think with lots more service increases, the more terminal capacity it has, the more the fewer delays they're likely to be, and the more the timetable will work.
Right. Okay.
So Network Rail weren't actually able to be any clearer than that. If you see what I mean.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. We might get the services, but we aren't. So I'll leave it at that for the moment. Thanks.
I don't think the detailed modelling has actually been undertaken to verify it. Yes. Anyway.
Thank you, James. Anything else, Councillor Heaney? No, Simon. Okay. Right. Okay, so I've noted the content of the report. I have actually read it all. Not that I understood every word of it, but I did read it all and made notes. And I think that the proposals are really good because we have major problems with congestion on the M27. So if we can get more people using the rail to get to Southampton, for example, or even to Eastleigh, that's better because that will take pressure off the M27, and that all fits in with our air quality and so on and so forth. And I think reinstating the tracker platform to it at Portsmouth Harbour, bringing that back into use is going to be good, because obviously that will allow more trains to be used within limited time, and the additional platform at Portsmouth and the South Sea. I think it's going to be one or it could be both, or it could be one or the other. I think so. I think those are great. So yes, made a note of those, and thank you, Hayley, for the report. And if you could find out if they've got any kind of timeline for this, it'd be very useful, and then we can let the opposition spokespeople know. Okay.
I'll do that. I'll make inquiries. Thanks.
Lovely. Thank you, James. Right. We're on now to item number 6, I think, which is proposed parking regulations and amendments. And I think that's Kevin. Am I right?
That's right, Councillor Stagg. Yes. This report presents the comments that we've received advertising TRO 51, which is a range of proposals, 15 proposals. There are objections to 5 of them, which are set out in the report, and the recommendations highlighting our recommendations are in paragraph 2. I can go through them, but I think everybody's got a copy.
Thank you, Kevin. Any questions from either Councillor Bosher? Any questions from you?
I have one point, and I know what Kevin's going to say to it. I mean, there's one in my ward in Old Farm Way, and I think a lot of residents there are rejoicing at that. But it's perhaps the age-old question: is there going to be enforcement? Because otherwise, it becomes yellow graffiti on the road, effectively. And certainly, that area in my ward suffers from a lot of business parking from Fitzherbert Road Industrial Estate, which is literally on its doorstep and is regularly used as a dumping ground with no regard for the road safety at all. So really it's a plea as much as anything that, yes, totally support them going in my ward, but can we make sure that there is adequate enforcement? And I think, Kevin, you know the long history, particularly with the home parcel delivery depot that's 100 yards down the road, that's been a complete nightmare in my ward for the past sort of 6 months. So yeah, it is a plea. I can't easily comment on the other ones because I'm always of the view, as I think you are, Lynn, that it's local residents that determine these sorts of things, and I'm not going to preach to anybody in other parts of the city what they should or shouldn't have.
No. And local councillors will bring it up if they are involved.
Yeah,
is that all, Simon?
That's it, Lynn.
Lovely. Graham, anything from you?
No, not really. I agree with Councillor Bosher and yourself that this is about it for local residents and local councillors to decide if they're happy. I'm happy.
Lovely. Thank you, Kevin. Well, yes, I agree with all those recommendations. So thank you very much. Right. I think it's you again, Kevin. Oh no, maybe Nikki, is it?
No, I'll introduce it.
Okay.
Yeah, the item 7 deals with a proposed residence parking zone in the area identified as MG. The formal proposal was advertised between the 17th of August and the 7th of September, and the report sets out the comments and objections that we've received. Paragraph 5.2 includes a table of our summary of those objections and comments, but they're set out in full in the appendix so that everybody can make their own view. But the recommendation is to introduce MG with 2 provisos: Culver Road, that the double yellow lines are deleted, and the properties listed in the second part of the recommendation are included.
Thank you, Kevin. Councillor Winnington, you want to do deputation, I believe.
Thank you, Councillor Stagg, and thank you for that introduction, Kevin. I'd just like to support the recommendations of introducing this zone. I think there's a clear majority in favour of the MG zone coming in, and I would also draw the councillor's attention to the fact that quite a few of the objections or the unclears were not per se against a parking zone coming in. It was just about the timing. So what I would ask Councillor Stagg is that if you decide to go ahead with this zone, that you put in the 6-month review that has been done with previous zones to make sure that people have their say, to make sure that those times are right for that area, and indeed the zone is working as it should do. But I think it's an area over the years which has had quite a mixed view on parking zones. I do know that the eastern part of the area did say yes to a parking zone about 13, 14 years ago, but at that time there was a different method in progress, and there weren't enough people saying yes. But I do think that now there's a clear majority in favour, especially when you take into account those who were in favour in the principle of the zone, but not necessarily of the particular times. Then I think it is the right thing to do. But it's the acknowledgement, as has been with all of these zones, that if people vote for it, they get it, and if people don't vote for it, they don't. And obviously it's in the context as well of the areas to the west have already been asked about parking zones, and the area to the north and the east are on the are being asked as well in terms of at different stages. So I think it's all a very sensible way of doing, and as people have voted for it, I support the recommendations, and I hope the Cabinet member will do so as well.
Thank you, Councillor Winton. Can I just check with you, Kevin? We normally do a review after 12 months, don't we?
We did one formal review of MD, and then what we said in the past
yes.
is that we could look at this if issues arise, rather than actually having to schedule in a review because the resource implications. But I'm sure people will contact us or will get to know if things aren't working, and then we can relook at it. So more of an informal review is what I would suggest.
So flexibility, basically, in response to residents. Do you want to say anything else, Matt?
I think just on the reply to that, I just think because, and it's a bit with MF as well next door, in terms of the existing MF zone, just because those split times, it was interesting. It was just really that feedback that a lot of people had some misgivings about the split time. So I wonder if that, and obviously with MF as well, it might be the right thing to have a specific review in, just because these are the first 2 zones in the city that have got these split times. Whether it might be, and it could be you do them all together, but whether it be worth doing that as a set review at a point, whether it be 6 months, 12 months, whatever it might be.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I didn't want it to go away thinking it was definitely going to be 6 months when it might not have been. So I think this being responsive is the answer. Councillor Stubbs, you wanted to do a deputation, I believe.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. The few points I want to make. I mean, the first is I've been contacted, and I know that you have as well, by Andrew Parsons, who has been making points about the timing of this meeting and about how he feels disadvantaged by it being not currently in good health. There's been messages which I've seen, which you've seen, which have talked about a 6-day notice period. And if I would ask him if you will, at the very least, address that in your comments at the end, and just sort of give some explanation about why you're taking, assuming you are going to make a decision today, I imagine that you are, why you're going to do that. I think it would be very helpful to say it. or indeed, I mean, there is a good argument for not doing that. But if you could comment on that, I'd also like to make a few points about the scheme specifically. So, I mean, we've had this argument over a few years now, haven't we, about residence parking, and it remains my view that the way to do this is over a much wider area at once, and you are going to end up doing the whole of Portsea Island. But on the details of it, I'd like to query Highland Road. I mean, the report isn't completely clear, but I read it as saying that residents on the south side of Highland Road will be included in this area. That was always the proposal, and the new proposal is that some on the north side will be included. Well, Highland Road, for the large part of it, has no parking on it at all. And for me, therefore, I mean, I think in these boundary road situations, at least, if you're living on the road, which is a boundary between two zones, and they're often main roads with limited parking, that it will be reasonable to be able to park on both sides and on both schemes, because obviously, let's face it, there's going to be a scheme on the other side of Highland Road at some point. So I would ask that is something that you consider. And then the related point is to do with the doctor's surgery. I should acknowledge this is a doctor's surgery I use, but there is one on the northern side of Highland Road, and I know you're not making any decision on that today, but just to say in advance that when you come to that, some consideration needs to be given to parking for visitors to doctor's surgeries, because if you're saying, well, no one can park within 2 hours per day, well, then how do elderly or ill people get to the doctor's surgery? I'm going to bring up a similar point on that in Salisbury Road. I personally think you need to consider having a policy on doctor's surgeries and residence parking zones, for some provision for at least a couple of places, maybe on a short-term time limit, maybe some sort of card handed out by the surgery, but for something so that people who drive to the doctor's surgery have some means of parking. Because being realistic, and I know you could say, well, they could walk or whatever, but by definition, the people who might not be in the best of health, or the very fact that they're going there, and that's just not always possible. So I do think, as you're rolling out these schemes, that is something where you're having a clear policy on it, having a couple of, even if it's not for staff, but a couple of places at least for patients, so that there's something set aside specifically for them, is necessary. And those are my comments, and thank you for listening.
Councillor Stack, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I'm so used to going on mute because of the idiot dog. Yes, coming back to Mr. Parsons, that was a very difficult one, because obviously, I feel very sorry for his situation. But we did take legal advice on that, so it was a bit of a problem. But I think Jane Didino has written to him, but I will write to him as well. But under GDPR, I didn't have permission to write to him, so because he hadn't contacted me personally. But I will do, Luke. Because I believe he hadn't read the whole thing anyway, but I will do that. So are you happy about that, Luke?
Yeah, I think that's helpful, and I'm happy to send him your email address. So that I'm absolutely certain he would have no objection to you receiving his email address. I actually thought you already had it, because I thought he wrote to you directly. No, maybe you didn't. So I will send that to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you. I'll go back to Kevin now about Highland Road. The point that Councillor Stubbs has mentioned about parking on either side of the road, because I think we've done that in several places, haven't we?
Actually, can I refer that one to Nikki, if you're there? Nikki?
Hello. Hi. Okay. So Highland Road is, I think, as Councillor Stubbs says, there's no parking on there at all. Some of the residents and the properties have got off-road parking, but Highland Road itself is very alive and both. And what we propose is that the north side is in the MH zone, and
it's difficult to hear you actually, Nikki. Can you come closer?
Sorry.
Mike. So you're fading in and out.
Okay, is that any better?
Yes,
okay.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, so as Councillor Stubbs says, Highland Road doesn't have any on-street parking. It's all double yellow lines. some of the properties on the north side have access to off-road parking, but not all of them. This particular proposal or recommendation, it continues a thread that came up when we had the residence parking programme of consultation decision meeting, because local residents of those numbers were a bit concerned having to walk up to 1 kilometre to their nearest on-street parking. And that's why we're recommending that they are included in the zone opposite them. I think it's directly opposite Cassassin Street, because that's their nearest parking. It's not a huge amount of properties, but they are very old terraces, I think remaining from pre-war, that have had flats built around them, and those flats and new properties do have parking. And that's why we've made that recommendation. We can, I think, so the north side is included in MH with these exceptions, and the south side we've included in MG. But effectively what we've got is 200 properties with very little parking. And obviously it wouldn't be fair to give them all entitlement to one or other of the zones. And at the moment it's not possible to give properties entitlement to 2 zones, because obviously the vehicle has to be registered at one of the addresses. So we're trying to address the issues that have been raised as best we can to accommodate people's requests, and that's why you've got that recommendation today.
Luke, did you want to say something about that?
Just a question, if I could ask a question to Nikki. So when you're saying that a property can't be in 2 zones, is that down to an IT issue, or is that just a policy decision?
It's actually both. So legally, within our traffic orders, it states a vehicle must be registered to an address in the zone to apply for a permit. And our permit system as well is set up so that the addresses are on there, and we can't change that at the moment. I think Kevin was looking at some software, but it means changing the whole system to be able to have residents applying for different zones. But then I think that would need, I think we'd have to look at that on a case-by-case basis, because obviously the people that live in those zones would want to comment on whether or not properties near them were allowed to park in either zone when obviously they aren't. If that's helpful.
Yes, thank you for that. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've got a mixed. I do have to say we've got a common problem here with boundary roads are often roads, main roads with little parking on it, and the saying they're all on one side or the other, it just does create some distortions. If they could find a solution to that, I think it would be good.
I think I'm absolutely right, and we do have to look at every zone and the issues that are raised. So in this case, the properties listed in the recommendations are the ones that have raised an issue, and we're trying to do something about that so that they can use the nearest parking to them.
Thank you, Nikki. Are you okay with this, Luke?
Well, I mean, you know, I still think that some form of overlapping zone is the way to go. Now, I don't know what IT problems that creates. From a legal perspective, I mean, I'm trying to think now, and I can't off the top of my head whether there's any areas where we've allowed people to park in the zone who aren't resident in it. I wouldn't be surprised if there are, but I can't name you an example straight off the bat. I mean, I do think it's still my view that overlapping zones is something that needs to be looked at.
Well, let us have a look at that, because I think you've got a good point there, and we'll have a look at it. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Good. And the last question was about the doctor's surgery. Now, we did this with the cat clinic. I mean, I'm not sort of equating the cat clinic with the doctor's surgery, but it's the same sort of principle. Didn't we on Albert Road, where we allocated, was it two places that for parking?
Sorry, can I answer that?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yes.
Sorry. Just to say that the doctor's surgery on Highland Road, or it's on the corner of Prince Albert Road, it already has limited waiting provided, and that wouldn't be changed either by this proposal or any proposals for the zone that would be in. So that provision is already there.
Okay, Nick?
Okay, I didn't know that was unchanged, so that's helpful.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Councillor Heaney, I think you had your hand up, did you?
I put RTS in actually, but yeah, I'm sort of doing it virtually. Just to clarify a point about Mr. Parsons' correspondence, I got an email from him as well. I'm sure other people did too, and I noticed that his request had not actually been addressed to you. So I forwarded his request to you to say that it was obviously your decision, you know, and you might not be aware of this. And obviously, it's something that you will probably have had to take some legal advice on, because I wouldn't have necessarily known the answer.
That's what I did.
So
Yeah.
So obviously, then
Yeah.
the responses came back from
Yeah.
that. So yeah. So I don't think there's any issue about GDPR. If we forward an email from a resident to another member or to an officer, I'm sure the member or officer can actually reply to that individual directly, because we've requested it, even though they haven't actually sent the email direct. Because if we can't do that, that's going to create some real problems, because I didn't think that was the situation. But yeah, anyway, that to go on to the more substantive, I have a couple of questions. One is just to clarify, and I'm sure I'm right on this, but I just want to clarify. The southern boundary of the zone, MG zone, goes along Eastern Parade, and the properties on Eastern Parade are actually included. That is correct, isn't it? The line actually goes along the road, so I'm assuming they are in the zone. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, correct. Okay. And then I'm assuming that the other side of the road, the south side of Eastern Parade, remains free parking and is available for visitors, because this is the issue has been visitors come apart there. So it effectively protects the north side outside the property, but the south side will still be free to anyone to park on.
Under these proposals, the south side isn't affected. We've been discussing about the best way forward for the south side, whether we consider some sort of restriction, but we really wanted to wait and see whether this zone is approved and implemented, what effect that would have. We don't want to put something forward based on a guess.
And I noticed the morning restriction period for this zone and for the other zone we're considering are different. Is there any reasoning behind that? Particular reasoning behind that?
It's the same reasoning that our zones overlap in terms of timings. It's easier for enforcement if they're not all at the same time period. The MF and the MG zones were experiencing similar issues with seafront visitors, so we've agreed to split this 2 hours to 1 hour at lunchtime, 1 hour in the afternoon. But again, they're slightly different, so that they are a little bit easier to enforce, and it's more difficult for unauthorised vehicles to move around the area to get free parking.
Yeah, because the bigger the zone you're covering, period an hour, the more difficult it is to enforce. Yeah. The other question I had is one of a sort of broader principle, which I think, in a sense, Councillor Stubbs touched on. I had an email, and I'm sure other people had an email, from a person who currently works in Portsmouth during the week, but lives in another part of the country, and therefore comes to the city to work and uses their car, but lives in a zone where they're going to have a permit. Now, as I understand it, under the current rules, because their car is not registered at the address in Portsmouth, the parking zone, they would be unable to get a parking permit because their car is registered at their home address, which is outside of the city. Now, that's a problem, because I'm sure there are other people who live and work in the city. It might not be massive numbers, but who live and work in the city but live outside. And it's surely not reasonable to deny them the opportunity to have a parking permit on that basis. And we surely have to look at that and seek a way of allowing them to have a permit.
Sorry, do you know if they're working at a business within the zone? Or are you talking about?
I can't. We had a number of deputations on this, and there was an email. And I have forgot to have a look at it before I had the meeting. I should have made it. I think they might work for the NHS, actually, if I'm remembering correctly. So and it wouldn't be necessarily in the ward. No, they work in the NHS in the city. But
okay, this is obviously if they work for any of the businesses within the proposed zone or an employer, then they could have business permits. But if not, then you're right that you wouldn't. Kevin, is there any?
I think we'd have to look at each circumstance. It depends how often they come down here to. I mean, if this is their primary address and they're working 5 days a week, then you would expect them to have their car registered here because this is where they spend most of their time. If they're more casual than that, it's a matter of whether they're just visiting or whether they are resident. But we can certainly look at any questions like that to see whether there is a way of helping people who have a genuine need.
Well, what I will do, I don't know the full circumstances, obviously, because it was only a short email. If I forward their email to you, Kevin, and you can maybe contact them and then see what they say about that. Yeah, so I'll do that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Can I just come back on when you mentioned Eastern Parade, Graham? Now I met with, along with Steve Pitt, met with some of the people who were protesting about the closure of the seafront, including David Moore, I think, who runs Tenco, and I suggested to them that one of the things long term now would be to possibly have paint display on the south side of Eastern Parade, because that would also control the number of large commercial vehicles that are sort of dumped there for long periods of time. And his words were, I'm not averse to that. So that's something that maybe we will pursue and find out what residents want, because obviously it's up to the residents.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that is obviously an option, and one I certainly had thought about if we wanted to control parking, but obviously if residents are happy with that, it helps them. That may be something you'll want to consider. But yeah.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Stubbs, did you want to ask another question or?
Well, yeah, a couple of things. So firstly, just to build on what Councillor Heaney said about people from living here, some of the time is in a difficult position to re-register a vehicle. I mean, one I had a couple of years ago, this isn't live, this isn't relevant anymore, but still, was someone who lived in a residence parking zone who was a student from, I think, Germany, and therefore, had a vehicle but was unable to park. So that's an example. I mean, there was someone on a doctorate who was here, the bulk of the year, certainly more than just a student, 30 weeks per year, but more than that, but who was unable to register a vehicle. And as I said, that was a year or two ago. She won't even be here now. So I'm not asking about the specifics of that, but I mean, it's an example of some of the difficulties you can arrive at. And on Eastern Parade, I mean, I do think, and on the bit of St Helens Parade as well, you are going to face a choice here. You can't leave it unrestricted, because if you do, it's going to become a van and taxi park. And furthermore, you've got commercial ventures, the 10th hole being one, as you said, plus other things in the general seafront area, which, they're going to need to be able to park somewhere. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And so I've always thought, since you started doing this scheme, that the end result is going to be parking meters along the length of that road on both sides. And it is worth noting that on the north side of Eastern Parade as well, that stretch doesn't generate much demand for parking itself. The houses there have extended, and the flats all have off-road parking provisions. So there's not going to be a lot of cars for people living in Eastern Parade parked in Eastern Parade.
Lovely. Thank you, Luke. Councillor Winnington.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. It was just really going off on the point of lower boundaries, etc. I know, obviously, as Nikki said, there's quite a lot of discussion on that, but it's just to flag up some of the the potential perversities that I think, and I know this. If we're going north of this zone we're talking about, there's a potential issue with boundaries on the in the neighbouring zone, where we've got one side of a road is in minor leach ward, where there's issues to do particularly with the access to those properties comes off a road which would be in a different parking zone in terms of they've got back alley access, etc. So I know we talked about it at length in the past, but I do think we need some we need some sort of thinking about how we can address some of these issues as time goes on, and it might even be the case, and this is just a suggestion for you, Lynn, and your team to take back. It might be worth doing a pilot somewhere, or picking somewhere to do to try something out with a small TRO and to see if that works. Especially if some of the feedback you're getting from some of the zones is, as time goes on, that I've got a particular issue on this particular road, and my parking zone's over the road which I can't use. Obviously, there's already a few. There's been a bit of feedback we've had between the MD extension and MF, and whether that could be a case study, I don't know. But I just think that's if we do that, because we could do a very small scale, that just might be worth thinking about to give that a go.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Councillor Bosher, my apologies, I missed you.
That's all right, Lynn. I'll let you off on this one occasion, but only this one occasion, mind you. I've got a few questions and a few comments, having listened to what's been said in some of the deputations and the comments that have been made. Can I start with this 6-month review suggestion that has come from Councillor Winnington? Because I understand that there is a resource issue that Kevin highlighted here, and I wouldn't like to think we're going to get into this regular 6-month review, because you've now adopted a policy whereby displacement takes a priority, hence the reason we're going through these zones. And some of those which have been highlighted at a previous meeting that have been sitting there in other areas of the city waiting for about what could be up to 5 years or more for their schemes to be surveyed in the first instance. If we're going to go through a policy of 6-month reviews every time we introduce a displaced zone, then some of those people are going to be waiting best part of a generation before they get their views actually taken into consideration. And I think it is patently unfair on those people in other areas of the city if we're going to go down this let's do a 6-month review just in case we've got it wrong routine every single time. And so I would argue strongly against Councillor Winnington's suggestion. Officers have come up with these timings. They put a lot of resource into it. And simply put, residents can either vote in favour of the scheme or they can vote against the scheme. But we shouldn't constantly have to go through these little reviews just to make sure that politically we're all nice and correct when it comes around to May every single year. So please consider the people in the rest of the city that are actually waiting and have been waiting for several years before we go down that route. Think very carefully.
I've already asked Kevin to look at several areas. There's a couple in the north of the city. There's certainly one in Stamshaw. Been waiting for a long time, and resources have been a problem. But as I said to Kevin, as HC didn't go in, we have got an extra officer there. Those areas can be looked at, because I totally agree with you that people have been waiting a long time, and it shouldn't just be dominated by this the rollout programme.
Exactly. The second point I'd make, and I'm probably not going to do myself any favours here, but with regards to the one that's living outside of the city and is looking to see how you can address the fact that they want their car registered somewhere that may possibly be a lower insurance area than the centre of Portsmouth, but want some sort of dispensation, I would question, where do you actually draw the line? Because arguably those people that live in Horndean that work regularly in the city could say, why can't I have exactly the same sort of scenario? Where do you actually draw the boundary when it comes to what is construed, and how do you put those protocols into place? And I think I think with respect, you're probably on a hiding to a no-win situation if you go down that particular route. It's always been, since I was the cabinet member, it was where the car was registered in that respect, which was arguably one of the reasons that we used to make students think very carefully about whether they brought their cars into the city, because they wouldn't qualify unless they registered them at their home address. You give people the option to leave their cars registered at another address when they're in the city, and in theory you could open up the streets to student parking through the back door if you're not careful about it. The only other point I would make is about the figures, and I know a lot of people have made comments, but looking at the report, it seems to me that the number of people in support of the zone, and I'm looking at a table in 5.2, has dropped quite considerably from those in the informal survey that was done, which is shown in 3.5. So it's gone down from 230 people in favour of it to 143. Now, I've looked through some of the unclear either way ones, and some of them are just asking questions. You can't get a feel for it, or they don't like the timings. You could quite easily argue then that when you look at the unclear either way that are effectively supporting a zone but are against the times, could be classed as objections. So actually, when you look at your table in 5.2, your objections and unclear actually is a greater number than those that are actually in support of the zone in the first place. And that, to me, would add up to a rejection of the recommendation.
Well, we're thinking about that. Thank you. Graham, did you want to say ask a question or make a comment?
You know, just a bit of clarification actually, because we've been talking about the issue of people having cars registered in particular zones and not being able to be part of other zones. We were talking some while ago about having what we call fuzzy boundaries, and I'm now a little unclear as to where we are on that, because we said there were some issues where it would make practical sense to allow residents to do on either side of a boundary to choose which bit of the road to go in, because if it goes down the middle of the road, say, for example. So where are we on that? Is that not going to happen now? Are we not going to have fuzzy boundaries?
Kevin, Nikki, you've got
lots of officers rushing to answer.
Yeah, shall I just start and then I'll hand over to Nikki? I mean, what we've been looking at in terms of blurred or fuzzy boundaries is not the permits, but the bays. So if you've got a border running down the middle of the road, then you designate the bays on both sides of that road, maybe, for both sets of permits. So the zone overlaps where you can use your permit, but you only get a permit for one zone. And I think if I pass over to Nikki, she can go a bit further into that. Nikki.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Sorry, I shouldn't have jumped in. I think sometimes the terminology we use means different things to different people, and we do try and resolve issues. So you don't automatically propose a shared boundary. Obviously, we want to hear people's views and know where they park and where they want to park. And I think maybe it comes back to Councillor Willington's point about doing small TROs to make small changes. And we do actually do that. So TRO 51 that was on the agenda earlier has some what we call shared parking bays in Lawn Road. So we had an issue in Campbell Road, which was in the MD zone and adjacent to the MC zone, and the building on the corner parks in the MC zone. So what we've done is to propose shared bays for MD and MC permit holders that aren't outside people's houses that they can use. So although you can't call it a shared boundary or a shared zone, if that's a thing, we are able to accommodate these requirements. Our first full shared boundary that has been proposed is in Devonshire Avenue between the MH and MI zones, and they are under consultation at the moment, and we'll be bringing a report back to you either November or December to discuss that. I think really we want to do what's appropriate for each location and not assume that everyone has the same requirements and it's quite difficult. We don't want to prejudge really, so we can make small adjustments that will make life easier for people, and we don't want to assume that everyone wants the same thing. And our first shared boundary will be coming up shortly.
Thank you, Nikki. Is that okay, Graham?
Yeah, that's fine. That helps.
Lovely. I don't think there are any more people.
A quick clarification on what I was saying, because I completely agree with Councillor Bosher that we don't want to open up the opportunity for people living in Hornsey or students to have the opportunity to apply for parking permits in the city. Yeah. And it's quite reasonable to say that a student who lives in Loughborough or London or wherever shouldn't be able to claim a parking permit in Hornsey. But the situation I was imagining and thinking about, and it was implied in the email that I got, was that someone was working, say for the NHS in this case, in Portsmouth, was currently living in another part of the country, and was driving here to work, maybe in a position where they can't move at the moment, maybe even on a temporary contract and maybe not waiting for that to be made possibly permanent. So there could be some circumstances in which an individual could legitimately be seeking to live here in rigid accommodation until they could sort out their situation, and that could last for 6-7 months, maybe longer. So that was the sort of circumstance. But I was just clarifying that I wasn't asking for a free for all on that. But I'll again ask that to Kevin for more clarification.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there are no more comments on that, then I'm happy to recommend that the proposals go ahead with those caveats about Culver Road being deleted, the proposed WO lines there, and the intention to include the properties listed below, which is investing Grove area instead of the adjacent proposed MH Westfield Road area. So I'm happy for those. So that's the odd numbered properties in Highland Road. So I'm happy to agree to those for those to go ahead. Thank you. Right, I think now we're on to item 8. Yes, which is MF extension.
That's me again.
Is that you or Nikki?
Oh, if I introduce it, then I mean MF. The extension of MF is very similar to the previous report, in that the formal proposal was advertised. The report presents the representations that we've received from members of the public. They are put in the report verbatim, so that people can make their own minds up. What we've done, though, in paragraph 5.2 is done our assessment of those, and hence made the recommendation that the extension to MF is implemented as advertised.
Thank you, Kevin. Nikki, are you going to expand on that, or?
No, I wasn't going to. I didn't actually. My colleagues was involved in this report, so because we've got more resources now, I didn't have to do this one. But I would actually like to go back to Councillor Stubbs' point, I think, about Salisbury Road, which is included in this proposal and does have the doctor's surgery. We have been including limited weight where there wasn't one, but there isn't included in this proposal. Salisbury Road itself is really problematic because although the surgery's got 8 parking spaces for staff, there's a lot of drop curbs, so there isn't a lot of on-street parking. But there are a couple, there could be a couple of spaces near the first junction on the south side. I wondered if that's would like to put that forward proposal, and if you think that would be useful. I wasn't sure if 2 spaces would be enough, but if you think it could help, then we could do that.
Thank you, Nikki. Councillor Whittington, I think you're going to do a deputation on this.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Lynn. Very similar to the last, to the previous item. Obviously, majority of the people who responded were in favour. I have to say, anecdotally, I've spoken to a huge amount of people over many years in, especially in Spencer, Helena and Bruce Roads, who have been very keen to have a parking zone in this area. I think the people who responded who have said they want a parking zone are probably the same people there. Obviously, there are quite a lot of people with off-street parking in this area, some of which have said they don't want it. Obviously, one of the issues that people have had, though, is they bring up about blocking of driveways, which I know was a similar issue when we had the MF zone came in for Craneswater Park, where actually quite a lot of people were reassured when informed that part of the issue is that if you park across your own driveway, then you're not included in the zone because that isn't part of the zone, and you're quite able to do that. But also because there's traffic patrol around the area, that things like blocking of people in and out of driveways could be picked up on. I think one of the issues that was brought up by some people who are against the zone, and the reason why are actually the people with driveways was about people using their driveways as a parking place already when people are visiting things like the doctor's surgery. I just wonder if you do take the decision, Lynn, to give this zone the go ahead, if it might be possible to clarify to people driveways exactly what they can and can't do in terms of sort of protecting their driveways, because of course they're using it and we want them to use their driveways because we don't want them to not be able to in this area, because that would cause displacement on. Coupled with, I think, the suggestion that Nikki has made, which sounds very sensible, and I think it's just useful, a bit like with Craneswater Park, it's very useful for people to understand what their rights are and aren't when they've got driveways, because not everyone understands, and as Nikki said, along a huge part of Salisbury Road, you've got it's almost consistent drop curb along most of it. I have to say I was slightly perplexed by some people objecting because they didn't want double yellow lines down because they would spoil the ambience of their road, which I thought was an interesting aspect of a feedback, one I've never come across before. But of course, that's their right to express their opinion on that. But I thought that was a unique bunch of feedback I've never seen before. But all in all, I think it's a sensible thing to do. I'd again point out that quite a few of the people who are anti were anti because of the timing, not necessarily because of the scheme as a concept. And obviously, I think the important thing is, if we're not going to have a specific review time, which I think might be appropriate, and I think there is already a work stream looking at reviewing parking zones. That is one of the things we're doing across the city, of reviewing existing parking zones. So I think Councillor Bosher has got slightly the wrong end of the stick there, because an entire work stream is to review parking zones that already exist, as well as implementing new zones, and that's been the case since his party were running the council previously, when I know they did a huge amount of review work with some of our existing zones. So I'd like to say I agree with the recommendations. Obviously, we've talked a lot in the last item about some of the more work we can do, but I think in this case, because there's so many drop curves in this area, it's just the case of making people aware of what their rights are, how that works within there, because we don't want people buying parking permits when they're never actually going to not park outside their zone, outside their off-road car parking, or in front of their off-road car parking space, because they're in a misnomer that they need a parking permit to do that. So that's what I'd like to say on this one.
Lovely, thank you. Before I go to Kevin to ask him to explain about or Nikki about blocking driveways, and before I ask Councillor Stubbs and Councillor Heaney to allow them to speak. But we have two more deputations, written ones, I think. So, Jane Didino, have you got those to read out?
It's normally the presenting officer that does that. I don't have them. Sorry,
right.
Chair.
So who's got those? There's one from Harry Bush and there's one from CM Shaw. Who's got those?
I'm very sorry, I don't have them.
Right.
Unless they were sent to me by email, because I've been on leave. I'm just dialed in for this meeting.
Do you happen to have it, Jane, at all? Because I don't.
No, I forwarded them to members and key officers.
Oh.
I don't have them here. I'm going to open up Outlook. Bear with me one moment, please.
Yes, thank you.
In the meantime, can I make a suggestion?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, as Councillor Winton saying about maybe reminding people how they can use their drop curbs. When the zone starts, we send out permit application letters, and maybe we could put a couple of lines in there to say if you have a drop curb, you can use your driveway and park in front of it, and you don't need to apply for a permit. Does that help? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Nick. Yes, Nikki, thank you. Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. I just wonder if in future with any other zones as well, if that could be made a bit more explicit, because I'm recognising throughout this that there was quite a few who said I've got my own driveway. Do I have to pay for this? And I know obviously it would cut down on. I know you're replying to people who were emailing in with that. And it would just mean that people, because what people start to do is they think, oh, I've got a driveway, I don't want to pay to park on my driveway in front of it, whereas actually they don't at all. So their opinion towards the zone might be more one of indifference, or actually, as long as that's the case, I'll be happy for it to go ahead, or it might, or it might not. But the point is, it just gives people a bit more clarity in terms of what the situation is as well.
I think you're right. It's quite unusual. We had a few objections because they objected to having to buy a permit to park on their own driveway, and that obviously is never the case for their private. But it seems to have come up quite a bit recently. So yeah, make that point.
Thank you, Nikki. Jane, have you found them? Jane, are you still there?
Hello, Chair. Sorry, I am still there and I have a problem with Outlook. Pam, would you be able to look in your inbox?
I have, Jane, and I'm afraid I can't see them either. I'm in the same issue as Kevin in the fact that I've just come back from leave for this meeting, but I've just had a quick look and I can't see them in mine, I'm afraid.
Right. So, what do we do now, Jane?
Jane, I've searched under your name. Could they have come from somebody else?
She disappeared, I think.
It might have been Democratic Services, the shared mailbox.
Who's that, sorry?
Sometimes it comes from the Democratic Services shared mailbox.
Right. So until we find these, hopefully we'll find them. Shall we just go on with the questions? Councillor Stubbs, you had a question, or I believe it's a question.
Yeah, well, it's sort of a question. So we sort of merged these discussions, these two items together. And I won't really repeat the points I could make. The only one I would like to say is just about the doctors issue again. Yeah, I mean, I don't actually know. I mean, they've got spaces there, some, but of course they can, if they choose, allocate those towards staff. I mean, I do think that where we're having resident zones which are you know, the part-time ones, which are a complete exclusion for some of the time, then we need to make sure somehow there's a space or two at least available to the public for all of the time that the surgery is open. So I'm also thinking of the surgery in Waverley Road, which, you know, so there is one bay for doctors there, but other than that, the whole thing is within the MD zone, which means that if you have an appointment during the MD zone's hours of operation, well, you're rather snookered, and that you either walk quite a way, or you gamble with a fine. And I think that when that sort of situation, we need to do something, whether, you know, I think there should be discussions with the GP consortium, and I recognise that their position, you know, if you ask the GPs, they'll say, well, GPs and their staff shouldn't, you know, should have a right to park. Well, that's probably not going to be sustainable, but there does need to be at least some access for patients. And one of the points I'm trying to make in this meeting is I hope that you will consider, you know, instigating a policy for those areas with part-time zones, all of the ones, so that we don't end up in the position where people are left with no options. That's my only point.
Thank you, Luke. Graham, but just before you start, Graham, I can't find, you said you sent it to me, Kevin. I can't find it. Do you send it to my PCC account or my Gmail account?
Lynn, there's an MF deputation from somebody called Artie Shaw. Is that the one people are looking for?
I think it's
Pants,
I'm sure, but it's probably the same person, I would have thought.
I mean,
Yes,
I've got it in front of me. Would you like me to read it to save
Yes,
the confusion?
please. I don't have it. Yes,
This is from someone by the name of C.M. Shaw of Craneswater Avenue. I won't give their full number. And it says, I live at Craneswater Avenue. I want to protest against the decision to allow the residents of Festing Grove from outside of the MF parking area to apply for parking permits to park within the area. The northern section of Craneswater Avenue between Festing Grove and Craneswater School's rear gate is in the closest road within the MF parking area to Festing Road and is constantly filled with the overspill of vehicles from Festing Road. Many of these vehicles appear to be second vehicles which don't move for long periods. One camper van has been parked in the same space for over 5 weeks. There are many properties on Festing Road, and allowing them to park in Craneswater Avenue has significantly increased demand for the few parking spaces available in this short section of road. When the parking zone was first proposed, there was no suggestion that owners of can I just interrupt there? Jane, could you do us a favour and not keep pinging me messages about the other one, because it's all going up and blocking the email I'm trying to read.
I'm sorry.
So I'm getting all these little ping, 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 and it's all going up like a stack of cards. Let's see, where was I? When the parking zone was first proposed, there was no suggestion that owners of vehicles registered outside of the zone would be allowed to apply for MF permits. It obviously greatly increases the demand for parking spaces. As a result, the parking zone has had no significant effect on parking in this section of Craneswater Avenue. If the right to apply for MF parking permits was withdrawn from the residents of Festing Road, their vehicles could still be parked in Craneswater Avenue overnight, brackets, after 6 p.m, but second vehicles would not be left for weeks on end, taking up much needed spaces. And the actual residents of this section of Craneswater Avenue would be able to park in their road. I would like to know how the decision to include Festing Road was made, as the residents of Craneswater Avenue were certainly not consulted or even informed. The only way the MF parking zone will be effective in this part of Craneswater Avenue is if permits are restricted to those vehicles registered within the zone, and I would strongly argue against the multitude of properties in Festing Road being given parking access to Craneswater Avenue. Regards, C.M. Shaw.
Nikki, have you got any comments on that?
Yeah, I have heard. We've had a few phone calls and emails this week about this, about residents of Festing Road. Is it Road, not Grove? Is it definitely Festing Road?
Sorry, is that directed to me, Nikki?
Sorry, Councillor Brochure, yeah. Is he definitely saying residents of Festing Road?
This is directed at, looking back at it, it's a resident of Craneswater Avenue, directing effectively the fact that residents of Festing Road can park in the Craneswater Avenue area.
Okay. Festing Grove doesn't. That's nothing to do with this then. So Festing Road have held MF permit entitlement since that parking zone was approved. And that's not a proposal that we're considering today. They already have that permit entitlement. And that's an interim measure that was made at the last decision meeting to help with overspill issues. So now that Festing Road is proposed to have its own restrictions, obviously that opens up the capacity for everyone. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there was some misunderstandings because I had a few phone calls this week that people thought if they had problems with the existing zones, this was the meeting to bring it up at. And I've tried to reassure people that they can bring up these issues at any time. There wasn't a deadline of this week.
Right.
There is another one from a Mr. Harry Bush, which I've got, but I'll let somebody else read that if they wish.
Yes, I've got that one.
Haven't you, Jane?
I've got that one now. If you'd like me to read it, I think it covers
fine, whoever.
covers the point that Councillor Heaney was raising. It's from Harry Bush, and it's who has a flat in Spencer Road. Dear Sir or Madam, I'm writing in regards to the proposed extension of MF Craneswater Residence Parking Zone. I currently live in East Anglia and work at St Mary's Community Hospital in Portsmouth during the week. I therefore rent a flat in Southsea in order to attend my workplace. During the week and some weekends, my car is parked on Spencer Road in Southsea. The way in which permits are issued and the enforcement of the parking system causes me concern. The proposal states that the issuing of permits and the enforcement of the parking system is based on a vehicle being registered to an address within the parking zone. If this is to be the case, it will be noted that my car is registered with the DVLA in East Anglia, which is where I live. I therefore feel there is a risk that I will be declined access to a parking permit because of this and receive parking fines. I cannot believe that I'm the only person living within the proposed parking zone who has this problem. I would therefore appreciate if a solution to this problem was thought of before a final decision on whether or not to implement the extended parking zone. If evidence of my employment at St Mary's Community Hospital or my tenancy agreement for Spencer Road is required, then this is available on request. Thank you for taking the time to read my email.
Right. Have you got any comments on that, Kevin?
I think it goes to the discussion we were having earlier, or that was going on earlier, about how wide we make the criteria for living in Portsmouth. My initial thought was from Mr. Bush's letter that he seems to spend most of his time living in Portsmouth, so his car probably should be registered in Portsmouth. But we can make further inquiries with him and see whether there's anything we can do to help. Sorry, Nikki.
Yes. Right. I just wanted to make the point, if we can let him know, that obviously Spencer Road is on Eastern Parade, it's right next to Eastern Parade, so there will be unrestricted parking on the south side of Eastern Parade and St Helens Parade. And I think the on-street pay and display at the seafront finishes at 6 o'clock if you wanted to park there in the evenings. So there will be some unrestricted parking that he could use in the interim.
So, Kevin, will you write to him or do you want me to?
We can contact him, Councillor Stagg,
that's lovely.
And see. I mean, the criteria is that the vehicle should be registered in Portsmouth, but there are, I mean, he could rent a parking space somewhere, or well, we'll see what we can do to try and help.
Okay, for both of them, that's good. Thank you. So I think that's all the deputations now. So I can't remember what I was going to do now. Was I going to come back to you, Kevin, about something that Councillor Whittington had? Oh, the driveways, and we sorted that, haven't we?
Yes.
So yes. Right, Councillor Stubbs.
Councillor Stubbs has left the meeting, Lynn.
Oh, is he? Oh.
Yeah, he said in the chat, he said his bit, so he's leaving the call.
Oh, okay, fine. I can't see that. Right. So it's Councillor Heaney.
Thank you, Lynn. I don't need to forward the email to Kevin there, but I will just let the gentleman know that it's been passed on and he'll get a response from you at some point. So I'll just do that. I just wanted to come back on the issue about timings again, because I'm not trying to play sort of catch you out, but when we talked about timings in the previous one, the difference between timings was seen as an issue of managing the enforcement. But both of these zones, MF and NG, have a evening restriction of 6 till 7.
Yeah.
Now, the evening is probably the time when people are most concerned about having the ability to find a parking space when they return home from work. Yet, the MF and MG zone is all got to be covered by the civil enforcement officers. Now, I don't know whether we have more officers available in the evenings than we do during the day. This also raises a further issue that the more parking zones we create, the more need there is for proper enforcement at these times. And it's going to be inevitable, I think, that we will have coterminous times in different zones, because there's a limited number of hours that you could actually create. For example, MG, which is St Jude Ward, is 4:30 till 6:30. You can have 6 till 7. You can have 5:30 till 7:30, or whatever. So, but ultimately, there are still going to be overlaps, and policing, enforcing that is obviously going to be a bit of a challenge. So I'm really asking, obviously people will hope not to, they'll be deterred by the fact they could get a fine, but how easy is this going to be enforced? Isn't it going to create the very problem that we were trying to avoid earlier?
Yeah. Kevin, have you got an answer to that? Yes.
Yeah. As the rolling programme of consultation progresses, we are looking at resources and how we can resource it, and not only in terms of numbers of staff, but different patrol patterns and different to ensure that we're not. The new 2-hour zones, though, are much easier to enforce than the old 24-hour zones for two reasons. They're a much shorter period in time, but also because they're permit only. There only has to be one check on a vehicle in that zone to see whether it's allowed to park there. Whereas with the old zones, because there's a limited waiting period, you had to go there to see whether it had a permit, and if it didn't have a permit, you have to go back there after the limited waiting period to see whether it's still there. So that the newer zones are much easier to enforce, but we are looking at ways of improving the enforcement, the way we enforce.
Yes, I think you're right, Graham. We're going to need more enforcement officers, but how many people want to do the job in the first place? And also, if it might have to be split shifts, because obviously you've got a whole bundle of time zones which are around about the same time, somewhere between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock. So it's not easy to have enough people to cover that all those times, but it is certainly being looked at. Anything else? Any other points from anybody?
Yeah, I want to speak.
Pardon?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions if I can, Lynn.
Yes.
The subject of enforcement that Graham brought up is a good point, because and I think it's our capacity for enforcement that is perhaps the question that needs to be addressed. And it really might be, without putting more work on Kevin, the subject of a separate report as we go in that you'd need to look at, Lynn, going forward, even if it's a noting report. Because my concern is that Kevin's already expressed how it's getting difficult to manage, and you yourself says it's a capacity issue we actually got here. And I'm beginning to become a bit concerned, hence the reason I'm sort of suggesting a report might be a good idea, in so much that we have an expectation from residents in parking zones that CEOs are going to be visible there during the hours that the zone is in operation, effectively policing them to weed out all those vans and cars and whatever that they regularly highlight on social media that don't recognise this car, it's been there for 3 weeks sort of thing. But we're having all of those, which actually, if you think about it, it's about a car that is safely parked. It's just it shouldn't be where it is in a zone. To what expense is that on parking safety issues in other areas of the city that don't have zones? So I'm looking at it from a point of view of we're policing an area with zones. Are we doing that at the detriment of areas that don't have zones, but actually have dangerously parked cars, to the point we're relying on them to use the app to report because we are not being proactive in other areas of the city? I'm not really expecting a full answer on that one now, Kevin, but I'm suggesting, Lynn, it might be a good idea if the enforcement of zones comes back as a separate report, maybe, even if it's a noting report, because certainly in my area, we do get some very dangerous parking in some places, and that to use Norman Stanley Fletcher's phrase, is an occupational hazard, because the view is they don't come this far off Portsea Island, so therefore I'm likely to get away with some dangerous parking. They're too busy going around doing the zones in Southsea. Now, that might be a totally wrong opinion, but you can see it as being a reasonable comment from somebody, particularly up in Drayton and Farlington. And that may well equally apply to areas in the centre of the city in Cotner and Hilsey.
I agree. Yes, Kevin.
I'm sorry, I didn't. It is certainly something we're looking at, and as the programme progresses, I mean, we have had more enforcement resources since we started putting in the RPZs. What we're looking at is, are they enough, and are we deploying them in the right way, and are there different ways of deploying them to cover both those issues and make sure we're not denuding one part to enforce another?
I think, Lynn, if I can, I'm certainly not seeking to be political here, but certainly there is that view out there in areas that do not have zones and are unlikely to, even though I do have a couple of zones in my ward, but there is that perception out there, and maybe some sort of report as to where we were, where we're going, how we're doing it in the public environment might be something that, well, some people are going to disagree with it, but it might well be something that will flag up and actually look to address those sorts of concerns in the wider area.
Well, you can rest assured, I'm constantly nagging Kevin about getting more CEOs, and he'll confirm that, because you're quite right, we need to have more, but it's a question of finding them.
I appreciate that, and I wasn't looking to start a long discussion now. I was just saying there is an issue there that perhaps needs to be addressed by a report of some description in the future.
Yes. Nikki, you wanted to add something?
Oh, it's just a thought. I presume that while we're enforcing parking zones, there are still CEOs out in the city enforcing other restrictions. It's not a case that they're all focused on parking zones during those times. Yeah. Is that, can we confirm that?
Yeah, no, we have shifts. They do a number of different things on those shifts, but yeah.
I'm just saying there are a number of similar times, particularly in the evenings, across an ever-increasing number of zones that are going to require an ever-increasing amount of manpower to actually enforce them. People are paying for their permits. They are reasonably going to expect to have visibility that it's actually being enforced. Otherwise, they raise the question of what am I actually paying for in the first place? Particularly as we are paperless with the permits. So residents can't actually go out and look on a windscreen to see whether it does or does not have a permit. And I think you need something there to make sure that the rest of the city don't feel that they are being left at a detriment because CEOs are effectively policing safely parked vehicles, which is what we're talking about in residence parking zones largely. The only other point that I mean, I don't know whether anybody wants to come back on that, but I'm not looking, as I said, I'm not looking to start a debate. I think it might well be that it's better to have some facts and figures in another report that we can have a proper discussion about at that point, whenever you want to take it.
Yeah, totally agree. Yes. Right. I think
I did have one other point, and it was really coming back to what Councillor Winnington was saying about work streams, and that and talking about reviews. My point was there are 3 work streams, Councillor Winnington, but actually in the report there is a 4th table which outlines areas with requests for new zones, some of whom have been waiting since 2015. Those are the areas that are going to get penalised, that have been sitting around waiting for it in the first place, if we actually go through reviews. And it's actually all in the report. There's a 4th table.
Yeah. Agree. Right. Can we move on to the next one now? Yes, I agree that this can go forward. The VMF extension go forward. Thank you. So I think we're on to item 9 now.
That's me again, Councillor.
That's you again, isn't it? Yes.
Yes, item 9 deals with a TRO that was proposing to deal with an anomaly in Grove Road South, where there are a number of properties that don't have any permit eligibility. The proposal was to give them permit eligibility for KD. We advertised the proposal, and the report presents the comments and objections from those, and they're detailed as usual, verbatim in that report. The recommendation is that we do give Grove Road South eligibility those properties in Grove Road South eligibility for KD zone permits. Those properties, I believe, have off-street parking, so it's really probably just a question of their visitors parking and being able to get visitors permits, or occasionally if they've got second vehicles. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Kevin. Graham, you've got your hand up.
Sorry, I'm juggling a hefty bit of paper and trying to turn my microphone at the same time. I'm not doing very well. I just wanted to ask a question about one of the assumptions in the report. Paragraph 541 says a number of representations raised concern excuse me, about the temporary closure of Castle Road and the potential to lose parking on Kings Road, Elm Grove, if there is a temporary cycle lane. Both of these measures are temporary to assist with a COVID-19 pandemic and do not represent a permanent loss of space. They are necessary to provide social distancing space and to encourage cycling. Now, that is the case at the moment, but there is always a possibility, and I thought this was understood when we brought these in, that there might be a consultation on to make them permanent. So I'm wondering if the assumption that they're not going to be permanent has somewhat misled the view about the implications of parking, where surely we should have assumed the possibility that they might be made permanent rather than assuming they wouldn't. Obviously, if it's temporary, then you could argue there isn't an issue, but if it became permanent, there might be. So does that assumption, a change of assumptions, change your thinking about the impact?
No, to make them permanent, they would require further consultation, and that would be the point at which people could raise the objection to the permanent loss of parking space. They are currently put on a temporary basis. Sorry, the paragraph could have been better phrased by me, but that, I mean, it's not so. Yeah, there is. If they work, then there might be a desire to make them permanent, but that would take a separate consultation, a separate TRO.
Yeah. And so you're suggesting that the residents need to object to the loss of parking, not to the fact that the Grove Road people get a parking permit. So there, yeah, I can see what you're. Yeah. That was it. Yeah. I know they were they were left out of the MD consultation as well, and I.
Sorry, Councillor Healy, I think you've gone on mute.
No. Someone's trying to shut me up. So yes, I'm happy to support this because I think it does deal with them a lot. And although I have a lot of correspondence from residents about it, I think it's a sensible thing to do.
Councillor Stagg, I think you're on mute. Councillor Stagg, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry, yes. Well, that went on its own as well. Yes, it seems daft to me that just a handful of houses should be left out of a zone completely. So I'm in favour of that going ahead. So yes, and as you say, Kevin, if the temporary cycleways, etc., are made permanent, it has to go to a TRO anyway, so it can be all rethought out at the time. Thank you. Right, I think we're on to item 10 now, are we? Which I can't remember what it is. Let me see.
It's my final one.
It's concessions for care homes. Yes, it's your final one, is it? Right. Now, yes. Councillor Winnington, you're going to make a deputation after Kevin has actually opened the he introduced it. Yes, sorry, thinking of the word there. Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. It's a short report just dealing with a particular issue, particular acute issue around care homes and their ability to get staff in. The proposal is to give them or allow them to obtain the first 3 permits at the cost of £100 per permit, and for those permits to be non-registration specific so they can be shared amongst staff, and that gives them the ability to get those permits without either cost to the care home, without the current cost of the permits to the care home, or passing that on to staff. The report highlights the current costs of business permits, and yeah, the third permit is £630, the second permit's £300, so it represents a reduction in the cost for those first 3 permits so they can get essential staff in to help the care homes.
Thank you, Kevin. Matt.
Can I just ask, was there a deputation came in from the Hampshire Care Association at all?
I haven't heard of one, but I did.
That's fine. It's just I'll let them know that this was coming up today. So
let's just check with Jane. Jane, have you had one?
I haven't received any, no.
Okay. Thank you. Okay,
that's fine. So thanks very much for this, Lynn, and thanks for the introduction, Kevin. This just to give colleagues a bit of background. This came up during conversations within the monthly meetings, monthly meetings that I attend to do with Hampshire Care Association, but also the weekly meetings that officers have with our care home and domestic care providers in the city. And one of the issues that has come up in terms of the statute, one of our statutory duties as a council is to maintain and support the care market. So that's actually something that we as a council have the responsibility to do. And one of the things that's come up particularly over the last couple of years is the fact that a lot of our care homes in the south of the city are now within parking zones. There's actually some in the north of the city already are as well, and obviously some were already in parking zones in the city. So one of the asks is to sort of preempt that was the fact that at the same time as obviously we have a statutory duty to support the care market as a council. We also are working with our care colleagues to make sure that caring is that we have a pathway as a profession, so that people have a pathway for a profession for people who come from all around the city and outside the city but work in care homes. We want to make sure that they can continue and they feel able to continue getting to the care homes. Obviously this is a very tough time for care homes at the moment. There's a lot of additional costs that have been put on them due to COVID. With the council has been doing as much as we can to support them in terms of financial, as much as we can, but they still have got a lot of strain on their costs. So this is not just because of COVID, but also because of a general way so we can get out of our silos and actually work together as a council to support our care home market is really important. And this might just be a small thing, but I think it sends the right message, but also it really enables the care homes to retain staff wherever they're coming from in the city or outside the city indeed. And some of our care homes have got people who are essential carers for our most vulnerable in our community who are coming from outside the city. And this just makes sure that it's as easy as possible for them to get to work and stay at work, and they don't have to worry about things or look elsewhere for their job. So I think it's a really essential thing for us to do for our care market, for the most vulnerable people in our community, and for our care homes that have been absolutely magnificent in looking after our older and vulnerable people in the city in this most difficult of times.
Thank you, Matt. Councillor Bosher, you wanted to speak.
I'm not going to disagree with anything that Matt said. I think it's an eminently correct thing to do under the current climate, and I'd like to think that even going beyond the pandemic, if there is a beyond the pandemic, that we actually keep something like this in place anyway, because it's as much about the carers as it is actually about the vulnerable adults there as well. So actually it serves the two purposes, if you like, to make sure that there is surety of care for the benefit of those vulnerable residents. So yeah, I mean, I have no questions about this, just expressing my support for it.
Thank you. Yes, I totally agree. And particularly as care workers are paid such low wages, and they do such an important job. Councillor Heaney.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Stagg. Obviously, I have a second as the Labour Group spokesman on social care as well, health and social care. I was quite interested in this when it came forward. I think it's a good proposal. I think it will obviously help the care homes who are already under financial pressure to be able to have permits at a slightly cheaper rate, and obviously the workers in there as well. I think I read from the recommendation that it's actually going to be a permanent change. I know Councillor Bosher said he said it should be, but I think it is actually, if I'm correct. Is it correct? It's a permanent change?
Yes. Yes.
Right, okay, yeah.
Yes.
There was one thing I wanted to ask as well. For care workers that visit people in their homes to support them, to provide care, I probably should know the answers to this, but I'm not quite sure what happens to them when they go into resident parking zones. Maybe the care companies do actually have to buy a business permit, but if they do, would we consider offering a similar sort of an option to those providers of services as well? Because it's not just care homes, but people who actually visit areas where there are people in residence parking zones. For example, the late afternoons, early evenings could be a time when they're being visited, bed or looked after or put to bed. So they might be in zones where they would have to have a permit.
Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, we for people who have to visit people, they can get an essential visitors permit, which is charged at the normal rate of £30 per permit.
Right, okay.
They can't use that to park outside their place of work, but they can use it to go and visit people.
Any other comments, questions? Right, I totally support this. I think it's really good, and I think it's an important message to get out to the community, that how much we actually appreciate the work that goes on in the care homes, because, and particularly over recent months, it's been amazing the amount of work that has gone in, and people putting themselves sort of in danger in doing so. So I think it's brilliant. So very, very happy to support that one. Thank you. Right, we're now on to item 11, which I think is Hayley. I think you're on the next two, aren't you, Hayley?
Yeah, I think I'm the next three, in fact.
Oh, in fact, right. Okay, fine. Oh, yes, 3. Right. Would you like to introduce? Have you got any? No, I just noticed that. Right. Would you like to start? Present the report.
So this item is an information report updating on phase 1 of the on-street residential charge point scheme. This was specifically for residential areas that do not benefit from off-street parking to enable residents to charge their vehicles close to their home with the 75% government grant received. The charge points are required to remain in place for a period of 3 years. Usage is monitored across a 3-year period to understand the usage and uptake of electric vehicles within the city. It is hoped that installation of electric vehicle charging points will encourage and enable local residents to make the change from their regular petrol or diesel vehicles. Phase 1 of the scheme saw 36 electric vehicle charge points installed in March 2019. In November 2019, the first phase of the on-street residential charge point scheme won the Transtech Award for e-mobility progress. Orcs is thought to be the only pay-as-you-go, lamp column-based on-street resident charging solution which benefits from designated parking bays, guaranteeing access to the charge points. The report shows usage data for all sites since launch in Appendix A. In addition to usage data, user surveys were undertaken at the end of 2019 to understand user experience of the scheme. Both Phase 1 requesters and Phase 2 requesters who already own an electric vehicle and are likely to be accessing charge points were sent the survey. Key findings from the survey were that most respondents were broadly happy with the scheme itself. Most respondents have communication with other EV owning residents through messaging apps or some kind of mutual understanding. 69% of respondents share their charge points with other EV users, indicating the need for further installations. 54% are unhappy with the location of their nearest bay, but this is mainly due to the distance from their home, which will be remedied by the further rollout of charge points in the city. Most complaints were about the lack of enforcement where non-EVs were using the reserved bays. But since then, residents have been updated as to how they can report the issue, and parking enforcement have been notified of any specific issues raised. The survey identified demand for additional parking bays, which have subsequently been marked. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Lovely, thank you, Hayley. Any questions? Simon, is that you? Are you waving?
Yeah, I don't know whether Graham also indicated. Did you indicate, Graham?
No,
was that
I didn't.
previous? Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good noting report. Thank you for that, Hayley, and also credit to you, Lynn, for continuing where I started with this, because it sort of started under my tenure and continued under yours.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the graph in graph 1, satisfaction with reserved bays. You sort of outlined that, because if you look at the neither satisfied, not satisfied, or not at all satisfied bit, that's almost 30% of the respondents or there and thereabouts. Is that largely because of parking, other people parking in it, or because of its proximity to somebody who owns a car?
I think the answer is probably varying. I don't have the raw data for that one and any comments, but to hand, I think the issues coming back were about being able to access them where there's too much demand in the area, around non-EVs parking the bays and that not being enforced, some bays being too far away from the property, which is where there's phase 2 residents who haven't had one put nearer to them yet, And also some of the bays were identified as being slightly too short, which has also been rectified in those specific situations. So it's probably a number of reasons.
Right, I'm just curious to understand it. I'm also looking at the tables with the usage, and I'd imagine that a lot of these usage figures are probably the same people using it time and time again during the course of the month. So if I look at Victoria Road North, for the month of April, the first one there is got 30 uses. That sounds to me like it's the same resident using it every single day of the month, so to speak, in that respect. But the one that jumped out at me and was slightly curious, and perhaps you could just answer that one for me, is the one that's 32 Heathcote Road, which is sort of 5 down. Right. And it starts out with a 0 in April 19, then a 15 in May and a 10 in June. And then it goes through almost 6 months of nothing whatsoever before it suddenly becomes 38 plus. Is there any particular reason for those sort of 6 months of zeros, do we know, Hayley?
Yeah, if you look at the date of bay marking, you'll see for that one it was late 2019. So I think this was one that was picked up from the survey. So the bay wasn't marked. So probably where you see the use increase in December, the bay has been marked. So there's obviously some issues accessing the point before that, I would imagine.
Right. So in other words, even though the charging point was there, the bay wasn't marked, and so somebody else was parking there.
Yeah.
I'm guessing then, because we certainly when I was doing it, we looked to introduce a scheme similar to that of a disabled parking bay as being the means of enforcement, i.e. you had to be on charge and the bay had to actually be marked. Does that mean then that if we put in a charging point and it's live and it's being used, which would suggest that's the case with Heathcote Road to start with, if there is no bay there, does that mean that we cannot enforce it if a non-electric vehicle parks there? It's the bay that is the enforceable bit, not the charging point.
Yeah, you have to have the line marking and the signage to make it enforceable, as well as the bit plugged in.
That's
I think that one in Heathcote Road, Simon, was someone. It was somebody else who got in contact with me about it. I think it was a young chap who was a carer. Actually, I think he was. I don't know. He was Eastern European, I think, and he mentioned it to a neighbour. He didn't know how to access it because it was not marked, and then Hayley had it marked, so it was.
That's fine. But on balance, then you're looking at those usage figures across those tables. They're pretty encouraging, I think, for something that when I started it and you started doing the locations, Lynn, was proving controversial. I think is probably the best way of describing it.
There is something in transport never controversial. Come on.
No, you ask 100 questions, you get 120 different opinions. I know that all too well.
Any other comments?
No, that's fine. It's just curiosity.
Yes, lovely. Thank you. Hayley, you were going to follow up because I asked you about those that were very much underused. You're going to follow that up, weren't you? Because we didn't know if it was people who had not actually said they wanted a car but had bought one, or they'd moved away, or something like that.
Yes, so we've only marked the bay where we knew there was the demand there and the car was owned. So for those that are still not well used now the bay's been marked, we are going to follow up with the residents who requested that and try and understand more about that and support them in getting that used, do marketing with the wider area if required.
Can I just follow up on that, Lynn? It's sort of prompts another question. I mean, obviously you sort of number crunch these statistics to see the usage, and obviously that Heathcote Road one now explains itself. If you were to have one which went through, let's say, 6 months worth of zeros recently, so in other words, from if it was 0 in let's say this month October and zeros for the preceding 5 or 6 months, would you be looking to review that location to find out why it is not being used? And secondly, if that was the case and the owner of the electric vehicle had subsequently moved away or for whatever reason, would there be a view that says remove it, or would it be left?
So yes, we monitor, we get the usage figures through monthly, so we do keep an eye on it and look at longer term patterns. So we would review it if it had not been used for 5-6 months, go back to the resident. If we found they'd moved or sold the vehicle or something, then it would probably be working with the communications team as to whether we did any promotion in the area to see if there's anyone else in the area who would benefit from using that first point of call. If not, the requirements of the government grant are that it's a 3-year trial and the charge point should stay in place for 3 years. What we could consider, if we could not find anyone who was going to use it, is removing the actual bay marking, so the charge point would remain, but the bay marking could be revoked.
But under those circumstances, in other words, you'd free up the space by removing the bay, but leave the charging point in place, because obviously there's an associated cost with removing the infrastructure.
But that's a long time to leave it empty when there's such a shortage of parking in the city. Could we not bring it forward, you know, sort of if it was empty for say 2 months to
Yeah, like I say, we're continually monitoring it. So if we saw a change in the usage pattern, then we would investigate that straight away, really.
Right, okay. Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. So I've noted it. I'm very pleased to see there's been quite a good uptake in some areas, and hopefully it will increase in some of the others as well. Thank you, Hayley. Right, on to item number 12, which is the next stage in this. Now, I think we have got we've got some deputations on this. So if you'd like to introduce it, Hayley, and then I'll ask Councillor Peter Harris, because I think you've got a deputation, haven't you? Hi, I'm sorry you had to wait so long. Hayley.
Yes. So the purpose of this report is to consider the public responses to TRO 75/2020, proposed designated electric vehicle charging bays in 80 locations across 71 roads. Objections were received to the proposals within the TRO, and therefore a report to the Cabinet member is required for a decision to be made at a public meeting. Portsmouth City Council is required to comply with the Ministerial Directive as written into the 1995 Environment Act, the Air Quality Direction 2020. This directive includes the requirement to implement the local plan for reduction of roadside nitrogen dioxide emissions by 2022 at the latest. Electric vehicle charging infrastructure is a part of both the local and national strategy for the improvement of air quality. In 2019, the Office for Low Emission Vehicles released an additional round of funding to enable local authorities to provide charge points on street. The funding is provided to support a 3-year trial to install electric vehicle charge points at residential properties which do not enjoy the benefits of off-street parking. This phase 2 funding again accounts for 75% of the installation costs, with the council providing the remaining 25%. The scheme is a trial, and as part of the grant funding conditions, the charge point must remain in place for 3 years. The trial is not only looking at providing charge points for existing EV owners, but also as to whether providing the infrastructure will encourage people to convert to electric vehicles. It is accepted that some of the charge points will initially have low usage levels due to requesting residents not purchasing a plug-in vehicle until they have confidence that the infrastructure is in place to allow them to charge the vehicle. Portsmouth's residential charge point infrastructure utilises the existing electricity supply from street lamp columns, with charging infrastructure retrofitted to lamp columns close to the front of the footway, or a slimline bollard being installed at the curbside in the vicinity of the lamp column. During development of phase 1 of the scheme, it was planned not to mark designated electric vehicle charging bays for the charge points. However, due to feedback received regarding accessing the charge points in area of parking congestion, the provision of designated bays was approved by the Cabinet Member for Truck and Transport at the November 2017 meeting. Phase 1's consultation also identified parking congestion concerns, and as such, designating charging bays were only marked immediately where residents already owned an electric vehicle. In the instance that they required the charging infrastructure to be in place to enable them to convert to an electric vehicle, the parking bay was marked subsequently once we were notified of the vehicle purchase. The 80 new charge points proposed in TRO 75/2020 site selection was based on residents' requests, followed by surveys to identify a suitable location. In addition to the 80 in the TRO, an additional 2 further charge points were proposed in Dover Road and Lichfield Road, but were not included in the TRO consultation due to the requesting resident already having a disabled bay in place. The request in Dover Road has since been withdrawn. The TRO 75/2020 consultation ran from 7th to 28th of September 2020, and in addition to the statutory advertisement, each property in the proposed roads was written to regarding the proposals. 147 objections were received and 48 wrote in support of the scheme. Appendix B shows anonymised responses. Responses were analysed and considered in writing the recommendations of this report. It's recommended that the Cabinet member provides formal consent for the installations of the designated electric vehicle charging bays detailed in Appendix A, with the 19 exceptions detailed in the report, and that you note and guidance on the use of trailing cables to charge electric vehicles from off-street power sources by residents is being developed and will be brought for a decision in a separate paper. Reasons for recommendations is to meet the ministerial directive, and that there are a number of reasons that some of the roads that were originally proposed are not now being taken forward in phase 2. The only known requesting resident for the following 6 sites has notified us that they no longer require a charge point in the location. That's Delisle Close, Lindley Avenue, Lumsden Road, Malvern Road, Montague Road and St Ronan's Road. 11 locations are deemed to be in close enough proximity to existing or other proposed new charge points to serve that can adequately serve the known level of demand. Eastfield Road, Fordingbridge Road, Gladys Avenue, Glasgow Road, Goodwood Road, High Street Old Portsmouth, Laburnum Grove, Lyndhurst Road, Oxford Road, Tazwell Road and Wickham Road. And there are 3 sites subject to alternative locations and or investigations. Highland Road, there was no known demand in the area. There was an incorrect in the address recording. It should have been Highland Street. Kings Road, a scheme is proposed which removes parking. So if that goes forward, the charge point will not be possible. Waverley Grove, there was some wording issues with TRO, so it will be subject to a further TRO. Other sites which received objections were carefully considered, and feedback around parking and existing and proposed charge points was taken into consideration, but it was determined that these should still be taken forward.
Thank you, Hayley. Scott, would you like to do your deputation?
Thank you, Councillor Stagg. To be fair, I mean, I had a good conversation with Pam and John a couple of days ago regarding vehicle charging points, just to get some background about what the schemes are, who's doing what, and it was quite interesting. I'm only really here because if you go into 6.3 of the document, there's 2 in my ward that basically I just want to flag up, and you're going to be no surprise that one of them is the Shadwell Road site, because it's come up before on this, and it's again it's showing to be deeply unpopular with the residents. The fact that I think it's the second highest objections that have been raised. I know it was unpopular before, and I think it's probably going to be unpopular now. So I'm asking you, your good graces, is if you could slightly change the report or amend the recommendation to put that to not proceed on that basis, Councillor Stagg. I know it's you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, so I'm very conscious of that, Lynn. So apologies. And the other one, it's more of a technical point, but it's the Wadham Road one, which has only got 2 objections. And the reason I bring this one up is because the context of Wadham Road is actually on the Nelson ward boundary, but the ward boundary sits in the middle, so both residents will be effective. But the FD parking zone, which sits to the other side, causes significant displacement because quite a lot of people don't buy second permanents and they have a lot of vans parking down those roads. So, and also they've had, I think, 4 HMOs in the last 18 months being approved down that road, so they've had significant cars being pushed into the road. And there would be significant issues that would be caused from putting an electric charging point in, from taking away effectively a space that other people can use, because obviously if you don't have an electric car, you can't really park in the space. But it's just 2 technical aspects that I've pinned up. But also, as well, I think it's worth noting for your records in the report, if you go to 6.3, there's no mention of the Randolph Road site. I know the Randolph Road site is in there, and it's only got 1 objection against it, but it's actually not in 6.3. So I don't know if that's a bit of an oversight from somebody, but I don't know if that will cause you any problems down the line with regard to registering the objections. So it may be something for officers. I don't think it will cause you a problem, but just be aware that if anyone does anything, it's not in there when it should be, and when the residents are. But yeah, it's just for me, it's more so that Shadwell Road is deeply unpopular, and I think if you could, in your good grace, be seen to add that to the recommendation to be refused, and essentially, I wouldn't say refuse Wadham Road, but I think just have a look at it again for the proximities, because you've actually got in that area, you've got one in Gladys Avenue, one in Hartley Road, I think. Actually, I'm just looking at my other machine. I know you've got two in Oriel and one in Hartley, so there is significant capacity already around that area. So I think it might just need to be looked at again, Councillor Stagg, if possible. But I know, I mean, these are important things to move forward to. I myself have got my new company car list today, and I'm actually looking at an electric car because I don't want to pay the tax. So there are elements such as that to look at for electric vehicles. So I do understand that it is important to green the city up. I think sometimes in areas such as those where parking is tight, it might just be an idea just to look at it again. I understand you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So, you know, I'm not going to go and cry too much if you don't do what I ask, but I'd appreciate if you did, considering it's the second highest objective, and Oxford Road's been taken out. So I'd appreciate if Shadwell and Wadham could be taken out as well. But I'll leave you to make your decision.
Thank you, Scott. So we've got three written deputations. Jane, are you going to read them or shall I? Jane?
I think I was going to read them, Councillor Stagg.
Oh, were you? Right, okay, well, fine, okay. Off you go.
So the first one is from Jay Cockrell. And it says, "Dear Cabinet members, being a fully electric car owner, I'd like my support for the installation of new charging points around the city to be noted at your meeting. The proposed charger opposite Park House on Clamps Parade is of particular interest to me, being at my home address. The existing EV chargers in my local, the closest being about a 5-minute walk, are often occupied when I need to charge my car, causing me anxiety about being able to make my next journey with sufficient battery power. As a council who are committed to tackling climate change by seeking to reduce carbon emissions and improve air quality in Portsmouth, I hope that you will continue to improve the access to electric charging points across the city to encourage more people to take the step to switching to electric. Yours sincerely, Jay Cockrell."
Thank you, Hayley.
The next one is from David Whaley, and it says, "One comment I would like to make is that with the level of vandalism in regard to vehicles parked in the street, I, for one, would not leave my car on charge, especially overnight. The vandals would have a field day. The council can't even keep the bike service points that have all just disappeared. I also cannot see anyone in Dunbar Road being able to afford an electric car, so we would just lose a parking bay, which is sorely needed. Thank you, David Whaley." And the final one is from Jason West, which says, "Dear Sir, in support of more street charging facilities in Portsmouth, and in particular the western end of Clamps Parade, as we'll soon be buying an EV. Best wishes, Jason."
Lovely, thank you, Hayley. Simon, you want to speak?
Yes, if I can. It sort of picks up on what Scott actually said. And I'm just trying to understand the logic behind why some have been allowed to stay in despite opposition and they're not dealing with it. I mean, I looked at some of them and I understand why some of them are. If you take Delisle Close, for example, I'm guessing that's not going ahead because nobody supported it and one person objected to it. But I'm just looking at the others. It's just looking for an explanation. I mean, Burney Road is in there. Now, I'm not familiar with Burney Road. It doesn't seem to have any support and 3 objections, and yet it's not listed in the list for not going ahead, an exception. So you look at that and say, Delisle does not proceed on the basis that one was against and not in favour. Burney appears to be going ahead, unless I missed it, on the basis that nobody supported it and 3 objected to it. And then there's the one that Councillor Peter Harris highlighted. Shadwell seems to be going ahead when there was a majority in opposition of 11-1. And I'd just like to understand the logic behind why we've actually made those decisions. Because I seem to remember when I think it was back in probably 2018, beginning of 2019. I think Shadwell was on the first tranche that came forward, and we had a large number of deputations turn up to the meeting in opposition to it, and you agreed to proceed with all the others and prefer Shadwell. Well, Shadwell seems to have come back in this report, and it seems to be the same level of opposition is still there. So I'm just trying to understand why it seems to be going ahead now.
If I remember correctly, Simon, I think the opposition then is because they hadn't received the letters. Am I right, Hayley? I think I am.
Yeah, I think yes.
Yes,
I think you probably are right. Yeah.
I mean, I can discuss some of those things around those sites you've just picked up if that's useful. In terms of Shadwell Road, it was one of the original requests. We have proposed 2 charge points, both in phase 1 and phase 2. There are, in fact, that is based on 4 requests. Normally we do 1 charge point per request, so there is the demand in that street. When reviewing all the objections, we've reviewed the reasoning for them, and also in cases like Shadwell Road, we've reviewed them in areas. So Gladys Avenue isn't taken forward because we have got 1 proposed in Wadham, there are 2 existing in Oriel, and 2 proposed in Shadwell. So we are looking at the kind of area wider and have taken that on board, looked at the existing usage and the number of requests and tried to balance that. With Delisle Close that you mentioned, that one actually the requesting resident withdrew the request, so it's based on the nature of the objection as to why some of these have got removed and others haven't. So yeah, it's kind of a site by site consideration really.
And what about Burnley as well? That was a 0-3.
Yeah, let me check, unless John, you know off the top of your head, I'll just need to check that one.
I mean, don't misunderstand me. It's a good report, Hayley. I guess what I'm getting at is if you look at Shadwell Road, let's say, and the fact that there is demand there, Cabinet member has got to make a decision based on the evidence in front of her, because it's going to be there forever and a day, effectively. And looking at the figures there, it effectively shows overwhelming opposition to it, and her decision in 2 years, 3 years' time. And trust me, we are very good at going back and looking at previous reports, if not for anything else other than to score political points. But it would look on face value as to why did the cabinet member at that time make that decision when there's overwhelming opposition? I understand what you're saying here, but the report doesn't make that clear to me in that respect, which is why I've asked for an understanding of some of the reasons behind some of that. Unless there's a bullet point for Shadwell Road that I've missed.
Well, I think you've got to look at the reasons for the objections as well, because in lots of the cases, they say they're going to lose parking space, but they're not, because they would have to park their car somewhere, even if they didn't park it in the electric charging point there. So, and that is something that's a misunderstanding on the part of lots of people. A lot of people have said that we're going to lose parking space. No, you're not. So you've got to look at the reasons for the objections, not just the fact you've got large numbers.
Totally agree. I totally understand.
It's a long road, and I think a lot of those houses there are divided into flats as well, aren't they? So
I have to say, Lynn, I will score a political point, because you're making a decision based on objections and saying you have to look at the reasons why, and yet when it comes to residence parking zones, you always go with the biggest number. But I'll leave it at that point.
No. Graham, you wanted to speak as well.
Well, I noticed that Scott indicated he wants to speak. And if it's about the same point, I'm happy to defer to him, because he's been discussing his particular concerns. If he wants to go before me, I'm quite happy for that.
Thanks for that, Graham. I appreciate that. Thank you, Councillor Stagg, for indulging me. It's just on the point of Shadwell Road. I think it is a valid point actually. That is in the you mentioned the objections and the content of the objections. They say obviously 70. I think it's something they give the number 76% of vehicle charging points are actually on the passenger side of the vehicle, and this is a one-way road. So they would actually be on the other side of the vehicle that would actually be going out towards the road, which is, I think that is an issue of road safety, and I think that is something that you have to take into context of making sure that the vehicle charging point, if you are going to go ahead, is in the right place. And I think that is also a valid reason why the residents are making these representations, because they're having the same issues that you're thinking about. And I think that adds a lot of context to what Simon's saying, and I'm sure that Graham's going to probably go in on the same point. So I think on that issue of Shadwell, I think you are right. It is in the context of what the objectors are saying. And I don't think we should be pigeonholing people into what cars they can buy, because they're effectively, if they want to have that vehicle charging point, their marketplace has shrunk because of the nature of the vehicle that they're going to have to be able to buy, which probably isn't what we want to do. We want them to be able to have the choice to buy what they like. I certainly do as a Conservative. That's what I believe in the market, the market doing what the market does. So, yeah, I just think that that's another thing that you should just be aware of in the deputations. And I just think if Hayley could elaborate on that a little bit, if that is going to be the case, I think that does bring in the aspect of road safety. But if you have to literally have a vehicle charging point around the other side of the vehicle, it does put them in the middle of the road.
Yeah.
So I just thought I'd add that. But thanks for letting me go before you, Graham, on that. I really appreciate the nod. Thank you.
I'd forgotten about the fact that Shadwell Road is one way, Scott. Yes, but you're quite right. Yeah, making it very difficult. Yes. So, Graham, you were 1 minute ahead of Scott on the list, actually. So, thank you for letting.
I didn't notice that, but I thought that because it was part of the same debate, it was simple to pass across it. So mine's a slightly different point. I mean, I did look at some of the objections, and we're clearly getting a bit of a sense among people who object to this that people who have electric vehicles, electric vehicle charging points, are somehow being, quote, privileged, unquote, in being able to access parking. And that's a problem not necessarily just in residence parking areas, but also in areas where there's just sheer pressure on parking. I mean, I think of my own area where the streets are pretty chocker no matter what. Now, I fully understand the point that if you have an electric vehicle, you're charging it. You've got to park it outside the front, and then you've got to have that space. The argument, of course, then is, but the vehicle is not being charged all the time. Yes, I understand they've got to still park there. But the other issue is when, as parking bays, the charge parking bays are not supposed to be personal to the property. If there are, say, 3 bays and there's 5 cars, then someone's going to have to shuffle around to be able to recharge, because otherwise we won't have one outside every house. So I'm just wondering how we can maybe send a more clarified message about what the responsibility of rights are in relation to these charging points, so that people have a better understanding of what is happening here. I just get a sense people think of them just as privileged spaces for people with electric cars, but it's not quite as simple as that. I think we need a clarified message about what the rules are. I don't think it's always clear.
Yes, I think that's a fair point, Graham. Hayley, any comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think some people do think it's a personalised parking space, which you're very right, it's not. And we've got good experience in the existing scheme of residents sharing them. So yeah, we can take from that, and we can work with communications to make sure that the messaging is out there correctly, and the new schemes that go forward, it's very clear to all the residents.
I mean, I live in Hayling Avenue, and Hayling Avenue.
You've gone on to mute again.
I live in Hayling Avenue, and Hayling Avenue is an incredibly long road with loads of houses on it, and every property got a letter about a charging point right at the other end. But what was interesting, the letter merely said about the charging point coming in. It didn't actually explain much of this about how it operated, and that's, I think, when you need to tell residents about what the principles are when the letters go out on consultation. Like, this is how it can be used. This is when you're allowed to use it. A little bit of that would help. Maybe people understand when they respond, possibly. But that's just a suggestion.
No, I agree. I think that's a good idea, because there is a lot of misunderstanding out there, or lack of understanding as well, because it's not explained fully enough. It's very easy for us when we know what the process is, but for somebody who doesn't know, it doesn't make sense, does it? So yes, I
And the
think
other point, of course, is there's usually a phone number on there, and someone I did actually speak to the person on there because I had a little chat with them about this and asked them about because they're getting pestered with lots of phone calls, and when it could be explained, it might cut out some of that as well, cut out some of the hassle.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. No more. But I think we'll pick up those points up. But otherwise, I totally agree with this going ahead. And I did ask Hayley this means because several have been dropped out and they're not proceeding, that we don't lose the money so that we can put some more in. So I think that money can go into the tranche 3. Is that right, Hayley?
Yes, we in the process of just discussing with OLEV if we can do some more site surveys and are following TRO to spend the rest of that money.
Good. Okay. Lovely. Thank you. So I'm pleased to go ahead with that. And then I think, we're on the last one. Yay. So this is you again, Hayley, Solent Future Transport Zone. So would you like to present it?
Poor old Hayley.
Stay with me while I find the right report before I talk about electric vehicles.
Well, there's so many pages. I mean, I'm on page 257 now.
Okay. I think I've got it. So this is an information-only report to inform the success of Solent Future Transport Zone bid. Solent Transport led the bid to the DFT, which covers Portsmouth, Hampshire, Southampton and the Isle of Wight local transport authorities, with a focus on the 2 city regions of Portsmouth and Southampton. The bid was for a number of projects across 2 linked themes of personal mobility and sustainable urban logistics. Theme 1, personal mobility, was around providing new modes of travel and developing new complementary means of planning and paying for journeys, strengthening and deepening the use of sustainable modes beyond what our Transforming Cities Fund proposals will deliver. Projects include Mobility as a Service trial, Growing Solent Go, Mobilities Credit trial, Shared Bike project. And theme 2, Sustainable Urban Logistics, is around developing innovation approaches to address impact of freight and logistics in urban environments and includes drone logistics and freight consolidation projects. The bid was successful and was awarded £28.759 million in March 2020. The low funding package was awarded for each scheme except for drone trials, which received funding for the higher package. No funding was awarded for the Higher Educational Institute or University Halls Consolidation Project or the multi-purpose vehicle and freight combi vehicle trials. Due to COVID, the commencement of the Solent FTZ programme was delayed from April to July, and revisions were made by Department for Transport to the programme timescales. This includes the end year for the programme being moved from 2023 to 2024 to account for delays to the funding award due to COVID. Immediately after funding award, Solent Transport commissioned a review of the FTZ programme, identifying risks to delivery and how projects in the overall programme could be adapted to reduce the risk and assist with COVID transport sector response. The most significant recommendations were that proposed DRT and lift share projects be delayed and reduced in scope, with consideration given to cancellation of these projects in their entirety following a review in spring 2021. COVID, social distancing and other impacts on the public transport sector and car sharing still render these projects difficult or impossible to deliver successfully. Funding released as a result of delayed implementation and therefore lower spend on these projects has been diverted to enabling e-scooter share trials and enhancing and accelerating the cycle share project and potentially the micro consolidation. Approval was given at the September 2020 Traffic and Transportation meeting to proceed with developing the e-scooter rental scheme, with a report being brought back with more detail of the scheme before launch. Other key recommendations for the short term include early delivery of Solent Go Carnet tickets, enabling Solent Go to better respond to public transport users' changed working patterns. Governance of the Solent FTZ programme will be via a programme board and steering group structure as set out in the June 2020 Solent Transport Joint Committee report, which is included in the background document. And this will include representation from Portsmouth City Council's Cabinet Member from Traffic and Transportation on the steering group and from senior Portsmouth City Council officers on the programme board. Thank you.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Right, who have I got? Simon.
Yeah, I've got a couple. I appreciate it's a noting report. I think you said there, Hayley, and I missed it, and I did skim through it, that some of these decisions will come back to the cabinet member for T&T for approval going forward.
Yeah.
As it's a Solent-wide thing by the looks of it, will only the Portsmouth only bits come forward, or will it require approval of the same thing in other local authorities before the funding actually comes forward?
The funding is already there, isn't it, Hayley?
Well, because you've got a table further down which puts the total funding packages in place, something like let's have a look at it. The shared e-scooter trial, there's £930,000 there. Is that exclusively for Portsmouth, or is that a Solent-wide thing?
So all the funding listed there are Solent-wide. So yeah, that needs to be determined as to the split of those funding pots still.
Right, so if all the local authorities that are involved in this all say yes, please, then it will be that pot of 930,000 will be shared out amongst them. Is that how it's interpreted?
Yeah, I mean, within the bid, different projects had different focus. Some were city focused, some were Solent-wide. That one you've highlighted, e-scooters. There's 4 locations proposed for the trials. So yeah, that could be
in Portsmouth. Is any other?
No, 4 in Solent.
Yeah.
So
right, so they'd be looking crudely at 250 grand each, but I gather there's probably going to be more to some than others, I would imagine, in that respect. But that in theory, the e-scooters one, if that's an example, when that finally comes forward with costs associated, it will be a function of the £930,000, whatever our share of it actually is.
Yeah.
And also, looking at that costs table, you've got £500,000 out of that funding for programme monitoring evaluation, best part of another £500,000 for marketing and communications, £2.5 million for programme management. So you've got best part of £3.5 million out of that 28 million that's effectively going on marketing, communications and officer time. Again, is that spread across all the local authorities as well?
yes, so that's staffing all across Solent. Both University of Southampton and University of Portsmouth are also involved in the programme, so it's including their resources as well.
Right. Out of curiosity, is there any way that those sort of cost figures can be broken down into which region is, which area and which university is getting what, or is that not known yet?
So there was more detail obviously behind the figures to get them worked up for the bid stage. Obviously some of that has now been re-looked at with COVID impact, but we can get a further breakdown and circulate that, I'm sure. I don't think we necessarily have it on geographical level yet though.
I'm just curious as to where the majority of that money is actually going. Call me an old cynic.
I think we'll make sure that we get our fair share, Simon.
I don't doubt that for a second, and I don't think that's a political answer either. I think that's a city council answer.
No, I think that's a genuine answer.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, I think we'd all be doing exactly the same no matter who was doing it.
Yeah.
And the only other question I've got, which is probably I know the answer to, the mobility as a service trials. Is that effectively a region-wide Oyster card type principle we're looking at there?
Yeah, so it's a platform that integrates planning and payment for multiple modes of transport. So it gives the end user convenient and seamless travel. So you kind of think of your London Wave and Pay, where it's capped at the end of the day or the end of the week, and it will integrate with all the different payment ticketing and modes.
Right, so there's some sort of app where I guess I'm looking at it because it mentioned an app where you can get a train and an e-scooter and a bus all in one payment. Is that how that's ultimately going to end up?
Yeah, effectively.
Yeah. So
And
yeah.
presumably as well be tap on, tap off as well on lots of services. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds a bit like a pseudo Oyster card of sorts.
Yeah. They're all over the world, really, aren't they? So.
Yeah.
Did you finish your questions now, Simon?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Just curious.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. It's getting late, so I won't hold you up too long. But I was looking at paragraph 3.6, and it talks about no funding.
You've gone on to mute again.
Didn't even have my hands on the computer when that was happening. Yeah, I was just looking at 3.6. No funding awarded for the HEI University Halls Consolidation Project. I'm not sure I know what that actually is. The second one was multi-purpose vehicle DDRT and freight combi vehicle trials. But in the table at the back, on have a look, 4.14, it says DDRT trials, £801,000. So did we get money for that or did we not? Because it says we didn't get it, but it seems to be in the budget.
Yeah, so on the halls consolidation project, that was effectively looking at deliveries to university halls of residence and looking at consolidating those. DFT didn't select that one to go forward, but that's what that is. And on the MPV multi-purpose vehicle ones, we didn't get that, and that was a combination of the DRT, DDRT and freight combi vehicle, so it was a combined thing. What we did get is DDRT on its own as a slightly different project. However, that one has been impacted by COVID, so we're not sure what shape that will go forward in, if that makes sense.
And what is DDRT? Sorry, the initials mean?
Dynamic Demand Responsive Transport.
Right. So I know Councillor Stagg was talking some while ago about the idea of trying to exclude larger vehicles from the city and having drop-off points and smaller vehicles. Is that what that's about? DDRT?
Yeah, it's
right.
street corner to street corner services.
Right. So we haven't lost funding for that, as I initially thought we had. We have got it, so we are okay to proceed with that idea.
Yeah, it's combining that with the freight that hasn't gone forward.
Right.
I think that one is slightly different though, Graham. I was talking with Stagecoach and they've developed something which they're supposed to be bringing to us, but they haven't got that far yet, which was demand responsive buses, where they're working, they're doing it at the moment with Mansfield, and they're linking up with big companies like the NHS, for example, and they have an app that goes with the service they provide. So if you start a shift at 6 o'clock in the morning, you can book to go on one of these demand responsive vehicles. It's not on a set route, but it will prioritize the people who are wanting to be picked up at various places. So it will stop at the end of your road. For example, in my road, it wouldn't pick me up in my road, but it would pick me up on Copner Road. Close to it. So that's the sort of thing. And that's working quite well in Mansfield. And I've asked, and I think they're trying to work with the NHS here with QA to develop that here.
Right.
So, and this came out of COVID, lockdown, because a lot of people are working at QA, for example, were starting early shifts, and they had no buses to go on. So I asked if we could have a particular service for them, and this has evolved from that.
So, sorry if I'm being a bit slow, it's been a long day. So we are going to be able to deal with these freight issues, but by a different route, the freight issues we've raised about. I suppose the other issue, the other question is, if we can't do it this way, can we find another way of helping to fund this sort of project, maybe as a pilot? And can we find another way of doing pilot to see if we can progress this at all?
I'm not sure of the details of this one. Hayley, do you know from this funding?
I can take that away and see whether it fits the remit, and if not, see what other avenues there are.
Because I think the idea of reducing the amount of delivery vehicles, the pollution, the congestion they cause would be a really good thing. And even if we aren't able to do it via this route, could we find another route to try and do so? Of course, we need cooperation. It's going to be a bit of a struggle, I think, to do, but it's worth pursuing, I think.
Yeah.
But thank you for that. I'll later, maybe at some other time. So I'm desperate for something to eat because I'm feeling hungry.
Yes. Sorry. Thank you all for your time. I think yes. I'm happy. I'm just noting this, aren't I, Hayley? Yes. Good. This bit I think is quite exciting, potentially very exciting, but obviously it's early days. Yeah. So thank you all for your time. It's been a marathon session. Have a good evening. Have something to eat. Thank you all very much.
Cheers, Lee. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.